Look, there's only like one popular meme about fitting a large number of things inside something else. How's it going, y'all? I've been wanting to build a NAS for a while now. It's not out of a need for big data storage at the moment, but I can see a path forward where I would be glad to have a NAS already running. I'm working on some mechanical keyboard projects right now, and one of them wants access to a large amount of text data. I have enough room on my main PC, but I want to leave that as uncluttered as possible. Overall, though, I won't turn down an excuse to build another PC, and I think it's just an interesting project. I remember learning about various RAID configurations in my OS class, but I imagine, like most in that situation, it was just another system to remember the pros and cons of for an exam. But now I can take a learn by doing approach. I'm going to be building in the Jonsbo N2, which comes in at a nice 11 liters. Admittedly, I didn't do that much research into cases. I watched a couple videos about the N1 on YouTube and found some comments online comparing it to the N2. Overall, it seemed like a decent case to work with. I'll put the parts on screen rather than list them verbally, but I'm cannibalizing an older Ryzen 5700G build that was originally meant for some light couch gaming, but has just been collecting dust. I'm starting out with three 8TB Ironwolf drives, but I do intend to fill out the bays once I get the hang of the software. More on that later. In the N2, everyone says to look out for the 90-degree SATA connectors for the backplane. I am curious how close the margins are, so I'll try to get a close-up of that. After all, I'm sure I'm not the only one who tries to suss out if a requirement is actually optional and then despair when it fails. Otherwise, there's a classic knock to a fan swap, because apparently we must swap all fans with Noctuas. But let's get into the build. Hey, voiceover me here. So rather than go over every step in detail, I'm going to just outline the basics and make note of some mistakes I made so that you can avoid them. Something that's useful in a pinch is that there's actually a hex key provided that you can use to unscrew the top of the case. Next, for the hard drive fans, there is a header in the backplane that you can plug the fan into, but if you want a bit more control, you can just route the cable and plug it into a motherboard fan header instead. As mentioned, I also swapped out the stock fan with a Noctua. I don't think it's strictly necessary, but others seem to be satisfied, so I went with it as well. You can see that there is ventilation for the power supply fan if you're not sure what direction it goes. The bracket is fairly straightforward to put on, and you definitely want to attach the power supply cables first before routing them through the opening. Also, if you use a 2.5-inch SSD as a boot drive, for example, you want to remember to route the SATA power cable through here as well. The backplane is powered by two Molex cables, which you can just route over the motherboard tray, and off to the side there's a little cutaway for the SATA cables to route to the motherboard. For the motherboard, you just line up the I/O. It can be a little finicky since there's a bunch of cables sticking out, but overall not that big of a deal. The 2.5-inch drive goes off to the side. As I mentioned before, if you are using one, you want to have the cable from the PSU routed through. Here's a closer look at the SATA connections on the backplane. Without the 90-degree cable, it obviously sticks out more, but it shouldn't interfere with the fan movement if the grill is installed, unlike here. However, I'm not sure how strong the actual connector is, so I'd say use straight cables at your own risk. And here's how that looks with all 90-degree cables in there. Definitely much less precarious. Hard drive installation is workable. There are rubber grommets that you attach to the sides of the hard drive, which line up with the slots. The strap itself doesn't seem like the strongest, but I shouldn't need to constantly be taking drives out, so I'm not too worried. I did initially move some drives around to test out each slot, since I'm only using 3 out of the 5 maximum. In some instances, I hadn't pushed the drive in all the way. It does need to be more or less flush with the opening of the bay. Overall, the N2 is quite a straightforward case to build in. In terms of small form factor, I have prior experience with the Velka 7, which will hurt your fingers, but is extremely satisfying. The Inwin Chopin, which is what I took the 5700G system out of. The A4H2O, which is relatively straightforward. I would say out of all of those, the N2 has the easiest power cable routing, though the comparison to the Velka 7 and the A4H2O isn't exactly fair since there's no GPU to worry about in here. But I would say that almost all the struggles I had were because I was trying to film and show off specific aspects of this case, especially the backplane. The biggest difference from other traditional small form factor builds, of course, is the mess of SATA cables that you will have to deal with, but the case does have ample room to bend and cram them up here, so that's not a huge worry. Anyway, I'm not going to show any of the software setup, unfortunately. I currently don't have the capability to screen capture another system, and I'm probably going to be bouncing between docs and videos to square everything away. But if anything interesting does happen while I'm learning, I might post a follow-up. Or if I can't figure out True NAS and I switch to Unraid, for example, which I have heard is more beginner friendly, I'd be down to talk a bit more about that. But that's all I have today. Stay tuned for a video about some niche keyboard science, and thanks for watching.